You're listening to Embrace Your Snake, the #1 podcast for creatives and entrepreneurs that have big ideas and need just a little bit of help to get them out into the world. I'm your host, Michael Jackson, and today we're talking about flexibility. So, how does flexibility work when you're thinking about focus and perseverance? Let's just talk about it. So, today I want to talk about flexibility. Now, in the past, I've talked about focus and I've talked about staying on course, picking something and going with it. And that's the one thing that you're going for. Pick the one thing. Your idea has got to be solid so that you can actually reach your goals. Now, today I want to talk about flexibility. And that you go, well, Michael, that flexibility doesn't really work if you're going to stay focused, right? Because if I'm focused, I know what I want to do. And it's rigid. I want to get there. I want to be a rock star. I want to own a business that does X, Y, Z. I want to do these other things. And the truth about that is, yes, you do need to think of that one thing. You do need to have that focus and make it to that goal. However, you need to be flexible enough to understand when some things aren't working so that you can change. And I will give you a perfect example. As a matter of fact, you're actually listening to my example in flexibility right here. For the past, well, it's been, 3 months now almost, I've been doing this podcast. And I started out doing a simple podcast. It was a podcast about thoughts that I have, very similar to what we're doing right here in this episode that you're listening to. And then people start saying, well, Michael, we like what you're doing, but we want to see you. We want to see more of you. And since I hadn't actually been on a podcast before, especially in video, I said, you know what, I'm going to try and do maybe just pictures. I'll put pictures up and sync them up, and I'll put some cool music behind it, and that'll be my podcast now. So I went from straight podcast, no pictures, to now, and you say pictures, that's not a podcast. Well, I actually made it into a podcast on YouTube. So I do an audio podcast and I do a video podcast also. And people were like, yeah, the cool pictures are cool, Michael. That's kind of cool. But we want pictures of you. So now I said, you know what? I'll put in a couple of snapshots of me into the older episodes. And if you go back and look, you'll find some in there. I wasn't really comfortable with it at the time. But you see that I started morphing the idea of this podcast. However, people were still saying, Michael, no, you know what? We're watching this on YouTube now. And that's a visual medium, and we need to see you. And I was like, yeah, okay. I don't know. So I did a podcast, and you know what I did? I did one called Start Before You're Ready. If you go back, you'll find it. And it's the very first podcast that I did where I was on the screen. I actually decided, okay, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to turn on some lights. I'm going to point the camera. I'm going to talk. And let's see how it comes out. And I was pleasantly surprised. Now, all this is wrapped into a single package of focus, but it's focused with some flexibility. All of it is the same thing. Everything is the podcast. Everything is moving toward my goal of helping entrepreneurs, business people, creatives, because I love doing stuff with creatives, understand that there is a structure to things that you need to have if you're actually going to run your life of music and art and become a business person. You have to incorporate these things. So I started out my podcast as just, I'm going to sit behind my microphone and talk. And now I've gotten to the point where not only am I on the camera, but I'm interviewing other people. And I found that I enjoy that. And I found that people like both forms of the podcast. They actually like when I'm speaking and giving thoughts and hopefully inspiration and ideas to people. And there's also the interviews that I do with people where they talk and they give ideas and generate ideas back to the audience. So both things are important and both of them fit into my overall one thing of doing a podcast. I hope that makes sense to you. So the focus is I'm going to do this podcast. I want to actually give back to the community of artists that I love, I enjoy, I want to be successful. And the flexibility is, well, it didn't work as just a straight podcast, so I had to zig this way, zig that way. And finally, we've come up with something that I think is starting to work. And you know what? It's probably going to change again in the next day, 2 days, week, 2 weeks, month, year. It will keep evolving, but my singular focus is putting out a podcast that helps people. I hope that makes sense to you. So, focus and flexibility can live in the same apartment together. They can actually even share the same bed. They can be friends. The focus is what is the overall goal. The flexibility is how do I get to that goal and make it into the project that it's meant to be. It's not so rigid that it has to stay exactly the same. Flexibility and focus work hand in hand. I'm Michael Jackson. Peace.